Hello YouTube, this is Morgan Airspeed Prime here with my next Avatar video. This is going to be the next in my series of videos going over the Uncle Iroh's Adventure Guide, the newest Avatar Legends RPG book. In this one, I'm going to go over the fourth of the 5 adventures in the book. This is going to be for the Aang era adventure, Return and Regrowth. So again, remember all of these adventures are kind of connected because they're all part of they're all set on Jasmine Island. They all are going to utilize the legend NPC characters introduced in this book from this era. So in this case, we have Piandao and Iroh, 2 Order of the White Lotus members, because we get a slightly Order of the White Lotus kind of focused story overall here. And this one is interesting. I would say it's more or less structure-wise the opposite of the 100-Year War era adventure, which was, of course, Lu Ten and Zhao, the devastation of Jasmine Island. It was very canon material focused, kind of locked in storytelling with some room to move around in, and the legend NPC characters Lu Ten and Zhao played a really important big role in the story. You're constantly interacting with them. You learned certain information about both characters that was interesting, and they didn't overload the story with kind of a bunch of like brand new characters you'd never heard of before type thing. And so it just felt very important, one of the best adventures we've probably seen. On the other side of things, we have this one where Piandao and Iroh are barely involved in the story. They are in the kind of classic legend NPC thing, like in other adventures where they're here, but the book really does not want you to use these characters. For one, this one doesn't really seem to have a lot of fighting, in that you can technically have a fight, but it seems pretty small scale, to the point that having Iroh or Piandao get involved in the fight would make it probably like extremely unfair. So they're here because thematically, I guess it makes sense for them to be here, but they're not really utilized that well. Like, for instance, Piandao might as well not be part of this. It makes sense for Iroh to be here because of the Lu Ten connection to the island, and the book is about him, so here is his involvement in the Jasmine Island plot, but that's really about it. So Piandao, there's literally no text in this whole section that says that Piandao does anything specifically on his own or interacts with any character on his own. Every time these two are referred to, Piandao and Iroh, it is always Iroh and Piandao. Like, together, they're here, and they don't really do much of anything. Because of that, it's a relatively open adventure if you want a very much one where you can kind of construct the narrative yourself. This is kind of it, because we have like 4 factions during an era where we're trying to do, what way should the leadership on the island be now that we're getting around to addressing that after the recovery from the devastation. And there's a lot more kind of open-ended stuff like that going on. But it does mean that there's maybe not as much concrete information. The other thing here is that there's a little bit of a teaser with this one, where one of the reasons that Iroh and Piandao here is, of course, Peace Monument. They help the Air Acolytes to kind of rebuild that. That's the main reason, effectively, they're here. But secretly, they are also here to investigate their other Order of the White Lotus member, Zhaibao, who, of course, we know as the guy who will leave the Order of White Lotus and go on to create the Red Lotus. And so we get a little bit of information on him here in his actual era, the Aang era, but it's such a tease, and they're like, this stuff happened in the past, but he's not here anymore. So you're hearing about Zhaibao from characters who interacted with him from a while ago, but they're not super representative of him, and it's just, okay, that's nice, but it's such a teaser. When are we going to learn stuff about Zhaibao? It's kind of interesting in that way. So I have some mixed thoughts on this one, where just from a pure story lore perspective, I don't think there's as much here as other stuff, but there are some interesting ideas. I do just in general wish that these were a little bit more focused on presenting kind of core information. I get it has to be exciting kind of gameplay stuff, but I think the Lu Ten and Zhao adventure highlighted that some of these restrictions they put on themselves in these stories, like not really utilizing the legend NPC characters, are not really required. And it feels weird when you go into some of them and it's like, ooh, oh cool, Iroh and Piandao. Oh, but you basically don't involve them for like 99% of anything that you do. Like your characters barely even interact with them that much as well. So let's get into this. The setup is that the Air Acolytes are here with the White Lotus, represented by Piandao and Iroh, to rebuild a peaceful monument in honor of the end of the 100-Year War. So this is the Roku Monument of Peace that's being rebuilt now to commemorate the end of the war. So there's some cool kind of cross-generation connections to the other adventures here. But they can't do this until the new Jasmine Island Council is elected. But now there are a bunch of factions on Jasmine Island that kind of disagree about the election and if they should even go ahead with elections or do something different. And then add on top of that the fact that some bags of kind of like the tea kind of seeds effectively have been stolen, and you have a real big problem here of just like there's chaos and nothing is organized, so we can't get anything done, and you have to sort out that chaos before you can go ahead with the elections, and then rebuilding the monument, and then learning what you can about Zhai Bao. That's the setup effectively here. So the historical background is that yes, this is a direct response to the previous era, the devastation, and now Jasmine Island over the last era has been recovering, and now is stable enough to begin to make some decisions about kind of its future and how things are going to be going forward. This is why it's called kind of return and regrowth. It is the island getting back to itself, but in what way? And the Aang era is a lot of change happening in the world, and so is that same change going to happen on the island as well? So the old divisions threaten to rise again, because what's happened here is that the old council members who have stayed in place this entire time to guide the island during this period of like chaos as it's returning from the devastation, they've all decided to step down now to allow a full new leadership to take over the council. And that's why a lot of questions are coming up at this point. We also get, this is the Zhai Bao connection here. Months before this adventure, an Order of the White Lotus member Zhai Bao grew disillusioned with the organization. To him, the White Lotus's partnership with Avatar Aang meant that the organization had gone from a force for global change to mere lapdogs of an undisciplined youngster. Zhai Bao roamed the world, seeking rebellious minds that he could mold. When he stopped by Jasmine Island, he connected with Isanash and the Autumn Leaves, which is one of the factions, and we'll get into that in a second. They then have a section here saying, who is Zhai Bao? And they basically say, go to the core book and look up the information on like Korra book 3. And it's like, we don't learn about Zhai Bao that much in book 3. We're told, we learn his name there for like the first time, but like we don't know too much about him super specifically. Like there's technically probably more information on the character in this adventure than there is in Korra, but that's the basis, I suppose, for why most people know him. But it's also why it's frustrating that they hold back so much on the information on the character here. Why wasn't he the legend NPC, one of them? Because it does feel like Piandao is not super needed in this overall. And yeah, some people, they don't want to immediately elect the new council, and some people might not even want the new council. That's the kind of big thing. The elections are coming up in about a week, and it's at this point when the White Lotus and some Air Acolytes arrive on the island wanting to rebuild the Roku era monument. Now, the Air Acolytes, of course, we have to remember this is sort of more comic era Air Acolytes than Korra era Acolytes. We're beginning to see them become a little bit more, I guess, organized, but we probably need a few years before they're truly kind of what we know them to be. The Acolytes that we meet in this, they do give them names later on. They are none of the characters that we know of from like the comics, so they are other Air Acolytes. So just if in case you were wondering that. And yeah, secretly also Iroh and Piandao are here to seek out a missing member of the White Lotus, Zhai Bao. They've heard worrying rumors about him and want to, investigate the last place he was known to be seen. Jasmine Island here. And then, yeah, the bag of seeds from this year's Golden Jasmine harvest has been stolen, and we need to get that back and figure out what's kind of going on in this as well. So, quickly to go over some images here. So, we get this one here. I think this is less specifically about this adventure and more just the book. It's the Uncle Iroh Adventure Guide, and here is Iroh drinking tea on Jasmine Island. Very nice. This one is directly related to it to a certain degree, because this is the kind of warehouse where all the kind of like tea kind of seeds effectively are stored. So someone has basically stolen one of them from here. And this is particularly notable because this island is all about golden jasmine tea. And so effectively it's viewed as someone has stolen part of the future of the island. And while it's not the full scope of it, because look how many bags they have, it's what it means for like someone on the island to have stolen, a bag, given that they know how important it is to the island. Then we also have this one here, which is just another location on the island. This is more of an insert image rather than, I think, being super specific to what's going on in this adventure. But that's the situation there. And so, yeah, because of this disagreement over both the direction for the leadership as well as who stole what, there's a lot of chaos, and this is where the player characters need to come into play. I'll bring up the character list here to highlight that this one feels like it's less about the specific characters and more that there are 4 factions on the island now when it comes to leadership and direction of the island going forward. We have the fact that there are the climbing vines, the autumn leaves, the antiquarians, and the risen wave. The basic description of these is that the climbing vines is more of your kind of reasonable voice in this, where like they're pretty cool, just kind of they have their opinions, but if they don't win, it doesn't matter so much. They'd actually be okay kind of working with one of the other groups, whereas the other groups are not willing to work with anyone else. They're led by Dew, and what they want is that they want to revisit the island's treaties with the other nations and kind of create new ones and just get the island back interacting with the other nations again after they've been isolationist for a little bit. The Autumn Leaves are Xiaobao kind of connected organization here, led by Isanash, who is a disciple of Xiaobao, of course. They seek to undermine the election and basically disband the council, get rid of, leadership positions, that sort of thing. Classic Red Lotus effectively here. And that's really what they're all about. The Antiquarians, administered by Yan, they want an isolationist Jasmine Island, and they want to end relationships with the Earth Kingdom and the Fire Nation specifically, but will minimally maintain contact with the Southern Water Tribe, which is interesting because the 2 main characters representing the Antiquarians are both waterbenders. So that adds into it, but then also you have the context of the Fire Nation, of course, as the aggressors in the 100-Year War, and then in the Roku era prior to Sozin making his moves, the Earth Kingdom was definitely viewed as the more kind of threatening of all of the nations in terms of what they did, and the Earth King at the time being quite aggressive also. So they're viewed as having problems, so it's fine for us to get rid of those treaties, and we'll continue to trade with the Southern Water Tribe, who in recent memory have not done anything bad necessarily. So that's the idea there. The Risen Wave, commanded by Hong, they demand reparations from the Fire Nation as a direct reaction to, of course, the devastation and what was done to the island. So you can see the different kind of ideas there of like, some people want the relationship with the outside world, some people don't, some people want to get rid of the council like completely, and then some people just want a response from the Fire Nation to the devastation overall. So that's the kind of basic setup on that side of things. And then also you have to remember you also have the Protectors, who are where all of the player characters come from. This is the fighters who protect Jasmine Island effectively. And yeah, it's just the idea that you have a leader at this point in time, and they just constantly reference that. There are once again 3 acts, but there's also a prologue and an epilogue here. The basic setup here is just that you play as characters who are part of the Protectors from the island. You know of Iroh because you know Liu Ten, who was important in stopping the devastation when it actually happened. And so Iroh is viewed as being quite an important character who most people will recognize as being related to Liu Ten. And so Act 1 is you meet Iroh and Piandao and the Air Acolytes. You learn about the plans, but then also you learn why this is all going to be delayed because of the theft and the issues over the election. Act 2 is the player characters looking for the missing seeds, determining who they believe to be the culprit to be. And Act 3 is then apprehending the culprit, confronting them, or convincing a faction leader to act. And then there is an epilogue where you actually do the elections and also address what information you've learned about Zhai Bao. Either way, regardless of what way you do this, it says here that Zhai Bao is nowhere to be found on the island, and you will only learn relatively minimal information about him, which we'll get to later on, because that's probably some of the main takeaways from this overall. You will always get the seeds back, no matter what. You can change Isonash's view on Zhai Bao overall, which feels relatively important, which kind of highlights the idea of, if you are doing this story, it kind of feels weird if you don't do it in a way where it's particularly like focused on that specific group with Zhai Bao and Isonash and stuff like that. Otherwise, it is very much just ignoring a lot of the kind of more important stuff overall. They say you can choose to basically not have the council anymore going forward. I think the implication is probably canonically there is a council going forward, but I do have to read into the Korra era adventure more as well. So, yeah, you start near the docks. You're introduced to Iroh and Piandao and everyone. They do name the acolytes Akash, Devna, and Tufan. That's kind of interesting. But most of the details here are very broad and open. You can choose which of the factions you want to interrogate and investigate and stuff like that, because you can see from the character list that it's effectively Legend NPC characters Iroh, Piandao, Chief Wei of the Protectors, which is not one of the 4 factions involved here, and then you have effectively the 4 leaders of each of the factions, and then 4 secondary characters for each of the factions. The thief is going to be one of the secondary members of the factions, so that's going to be Aputi, Jia, Hideo, or Thai are going to be the potential thieves, effectively working on behalf of their overall organization. I'll get into the characters, I think, a little bit more in just a second. I will quickly just say what they cover as like how to do the epilogue effectively, because everything else is just like there might be a chase and you have to go to one of the faction's headquarters and stuff like this, but it worked pretty similarly. There's not too much of a conflict necessarily overall. But by the end, a lot depends on what characters you've interacted with or not, but you're meant to find out as much as you can about Zhai Bao. They say that if you speak to Diu, Hong, or Yan, they have heard of Zhai Bao but know nothing else about him. Thai specifically knows that Zhai Bao is or was on the island with the Autumn Leaves. Other Autumn Leaves members know that Zhai Bao was here for months, but only a few people, Isonash and Aputi, have actually met him. Aputi says that Zhai Bao was on the island to subvert the coalition, attempting to transform the community-minded anarchists to anti-government extremists, and he left a month ago. Isonash, it's hard to get the information from this character, but if you convince him that Zhai Bao is dangerous, the information he gives up is that Zhai Bao thought Isonash a great deal about community organizing and how unfair the current political system is. He also complained that the Avatar threatened the world's balance, but didn't elaborate. He left the island a month ago, heading for the Earth Kingdom. Isonash admits that Zhai Bao's ideals are too extreme and dangerous for the island, and openly suggests Aputi has the right idea for government. So the main thing there probably is just Zhai Bao goes to the Earth Kingdom. Now, is that super significant? At the very least, it opens the door to a plot point that we sort of, I guess, know has to happen at some point, which is Iroh and the Order of White Lotus members at least investigating effectively one of their members going rogue and trying to influence people across the world potentially. When exactly we start to hear about the Red Lotus specifically is a little bit unclear, but we know it has to be at some point in the next 70-ish years after this point. So that's kind of interesting. Once again, they go over how to do the elections and the council. They have a whole system here based on what characters you interact with and stats as part of the game. But, you know, that's the situation there. More info on the characters in terms of their section in the book. The Iroh and Piandao sections, this is where it's super telling. It is just backstory on the characters. Like, as in, it's exactly what's in their bios, just condensed down into a paragraph. There is nothing about Jasmine Island really for any of them, and Piandao's one especially highlights that like he is not involved in this story like at all. For Piandao, it just says, though Piandao was once the Fire Nation's leading swordsmith, he became disgusted with his nation's war tactics and swore off providing help to the war effort. He's now a prominent member of the Order of the White Lotus, traveling the world to undo the wrongs of his nation. Read more about him in his bio on page 52. So, again, what does Piandao do in this story other than wait around and I guess the player characters eventually tell him what they learned? Nothing, basically. Chief Wei, they just highlight he fought in the devastation. He's not political. He's just focused on protecting and leading the protectors is the idea with him. Isonash, again, I don't know how to pronounce this name. Isonash. Not sure what the idea is here. Native non-bender of Jasmine Island, a disciple of Xiaobao, leads the Autumn Leaves faction. He is steeped in the ideas of decentralized leadership and dreams of a truly independent Jasmine Island. Although he wants to rid the island of outside influences, he knows that rushing change may lead to catastrophe. He believes he's spent too much of his life playing things safe. His regret may lead to bold action. So the idea here is of someone who's leaning in the Xiaobao direction, but Xiaobao seems to have turned him into a bit more of an extremist, but you seem to be able to turn him back to get the information on Xiaobao at a later point. Aputi, here's her description, is unique among Autumn Leaves in that she's one of the few to have met Xiaobao, and she absolutely hates him. She's risen to popularity after organizing an event matching repair people with neglected tasks around the island. If she stole the seeds, she did so to demonstrate the Protector's incompetence. And again, the setup at the end is potentially that I guess Isonash might step down. Aputi might be a decent leadership option to be on a council potentially going forward, or just in some sort of a leadership position. Diu, in another time, Diu would have made a fine monk in an isolated monastery. As she is, she's content leading the climbing vines until someone better comes along. She doesn't care about winning, believes there are multiple paths to the goal, and again, this is the more, it seems like, reasonable of the groups. They are kind of okay with interacting with the other nations and just want to see the island prosper again, no matter kind of how that happens. That makes a lot of sense. We have Hong, who is the Risen Wave's gruff and suspicious leader. He still grapples with the events of the devastation. He distrusts all firebenders, including Zuko and Iroh, despite what they have done to sort of fix the reputation of the Fire Nation. On the island, he urges a stronger commitment to technology and to avoid a dependence on benders. Because so far, like, everyone has been a non-bender, I think, up to this point, apart from, of course, Iroh. But then we get into Yan, who is the leader of the Antiquarians, who is a waterbender. So you can see the connection there of like why they're okay with doing trade with the Southern Water Tribe and not the other two nations is maybe part of that as well. He also helped out when the devastation happened, putting out fires with his waterbending, even though it was weakened, I guess, at the time. Jaya is the other antiquarian member, also a waterbender, more of a military kind of focused character here, which is kind of interesting. We have Hideo, who is this very anxious, openly anxious member of the Climbing Vines, and they stole it apparently to try and unite the faction leaders overall. Thai is a powerful woman who is the Risen Wave's lead instructor of earthbending, and kickboxing. Also thinks she's a spy master, although she has no spies. And again is, you know, if she stole the siege, she did so to create a secret cache for the island's safety. That's interesting. In important locations, we have the Council Hall, the Seed Warehouse, and then faction halls for each of the 4 factions. Climbing Vines at the edge of the Market Square. Autumn Leaves is in a back alley just outside the Market Square. The Antiquarians is a building along the docks. And the Risen Waves is on the border between the docks and the main village. Other than that, the pre-generated characters, like I said, or I forget if I said this or not, they're interesting for this one because they basically force you, at least in the pre-generated characters, to your character is affiliated with one of the groups. It's not that all of the pre-generated characters that you play as are part of the same group. They all have like a different one. So Ganzaya the Rogue is with the Risen Wave. Kim Jin is with the Climbing Vines. Kosui is with the Climbing Vines as well. Thaki is with the Antiquarians. Zoe is with the Risen Wave, and so on. So it seems to be the sort of idea that if you maybe make your own characters, maybe it might be a thing where you maybe force yourselves to all ally with one of the organizations going in, so you get a little bit more discussion and sort of utilize the setup from this adventure to its best degree of a lot of discussion, a lot of disagreement over the different factions and stuff like that. But that's the details coming out of this one. There's some interesting stuff here, but it's definitely, I think, the weakest of the 5 in this. The Xiaobao stuff, even though there's some new information on the character, to me doesn't go into enough detail to get it across in the right way. I appreciate them kind of opening the door on information on the character, in that we learned some new stuff, but I definitely would like more. Show us what he looks like, you know, tell us much more about him. When are we going to get a story about him? A novel, a comic, RPG material? Who knows? Probably the biggest letdown is just that, like, this is in the Uncle Iroh adventure guide, this is the adventure Iroh is involved in, and it doesn't feel like he's involved in it at all. Same for Pian Dao. I think that's the real weakness of this, is that the legend NPCs at times barely get used, but this is a really notable example of them not being used. So let me know what your thoughts are on the Aang era adventure here, Return and Regrowth, and we'll be back for the next one, the final one and final part of the series going over the Uncle Iroh's adventure guide, and that will be the Korra era adventure. But otherwise, that's been the video. Thanks for watching, and bye.